Bitcoin's price is crashing down below 100K for the first time since June, but it's not what everybody thinks. Everybody's saying, oh, well, there's major sell offs all over the place, but they're missing the fact that this price could be very manipulated by some of the big players that we just seen getting into this space. And the connection with AI does not help, as we're seeing AI see a major sell off in the market. But does this mean that Bitcoin is not going to skyrocket in flight? And is the bull run actually over? I say not so fast, my friend, because there's a lot of bullish signals that we see here in the market. And I think that this is just the start of a eensy bit of a shakeout, but we're going to get into all that first. We've got to go over the massive amounts of shorts that have been recently liquidated due to this shakeout, because we've seen Bitcoin plunge below $100,000 for the first time since June of this year. It erased 1 trillion from the crypto market cap and sparked 2.1 billion in futures, all to be lost. So, okay, Bitcoin, it fell, but look at what these, let's call them just altcoins for the beginning of this, because I know we're on YouTube, fell 35%. And that fear and greed index has hit an extreme low because everybody is extremely fearful. But what is interesting is that the man, the myth, the legend, Josh Mandel, has called it again. If you guys see the dates from this tweet here, that people think this was all a mistake or an error. But so when it happens again in the first week of November, don't have a heart attack, please. They were talking about 2.5 trillion wiped out because of two of the world's leaders couldn't read. This was all about Trump and China and how the Bitcoin and crypto markets crashed and burned during that time. But what's interesting is if you look at some of the replies in that thread, somebody asked Josh straight up, do you think that this is market manipulation? And says, hey, just wait for the next shoe to drop. I'm serious as a heart attack. Loose lips sink ships. But someone out there has been loose lipped. And as I said, there has been a lot of people screaming from the rooftops about various price actions that we are going to see here, right? And so when we see this massive sell off, you got to ask yourself, all right, somebody has to know something in here, right? We're not going to see just massive amounts of market sell off. And is this all a part of the plan to dip so certain people could buy? Really makes you think with all of this, right? Because I think it's very interesting the timing when we see Bitcoin actually plunge shortly after BlackRock dumped $213 million worth of Bitcoin. But let's be honest here, right? $213 million worth of dumping, that could cause a slight drop. But this quote unquote plunge, I don't know, because we have a $2.5 trillion market cap asset here, right? So this top asset has been kept above 100K since May, but BlackRock's sell-off hint at a deja vu case, right? Because we've seen all of this slide on down, and we're not saying slide to the left, slide to the right. Unfortunately, we're sliding all down, and this marks 17.3% down from the all-time high. And these institutional players like BlackRock tend to do this ahead of a stronger pullback, also falling in lines with outflows in that ETF. And so we've seen Bitcoin has recorded 4 days in a row of negative flows. So these ETFs are actually now seen as somewhat negative, but I think it's not just these ETFs. There's a few different factors that I think here that we should be keeping a very close eye on, because when we look at more people at this, or more of these buyers start to come in, I think the negative is that we'll see some potential people with some loose hands. And we're seeing that right now in the market with actually one of the bigger players here in the treasury space, because we've had one of these treasury companies, Saquons, which is associated with Swan. It's the French New York Stock Exchange linked firm that started buying Bitcoin in July. They had to sell off Bitcoin for this first time ever. And now marks the first treasury company that's had to do that, right? So as we start to see more of these Bitcoin treasury companies come online, you got to ask yourself, how many will we start to see sell off because they are seeing some of this negative? And as you guys all know, these Bitcoin treasury companies with these MNAVs and all that, they're meant to be more of a levered play on Bitcoin. So it's going to be interesting to see this first initial shakeout, especially when we've seen a lot of these treasury companies start to come online in the last 6 months. How many of them are actually so bullish that they're able to avoid selling their Bitcoin in this area? Now, this is where I think it can be somewhat interesting. And seeing this $100 million sell off from Saquon's is just the first that I think, because it's a semiconductor firm, so it's looking to pay down some debt. Okay. And it's also got an underlying business, but it still holds over 2,000 Bitcoin. But the stock closing down so low at 16.6%, you got to ask yourself, is this going to continue? And it begs the question. Everybody's always asking, hey, is Bitcoin's price being manipulated so bigger dogs can get in? Everybody said, oh, in 2017 it was being manipulated. But now at the $2.5 trillion market cap, it is very interesting to think, is Bitcoin actually too big to be manipulated? We do have some major whales that have come in, but I do like to look at what my boy Checkmatey, friend of the program, who's been on the show a couple times, what he has to say, because he says, at 100K, 57% of the overall holders, and I've heard him talk about 94K be a big driver here recently. But Checkmatey is saying that with the price of the transactions on chain, we don't think about our coins from prior cycles as much as the one we bought 3 days ago. 57% of all dollars invested in Bitcoin are now underwater with it at 100K. 63% of capital invested at the cost basis of 95K. So that's where I think it's going to get interesting. If we fall below that 95K route, that's where a lot of people can start to sell off and get really shaky with their hands, because of course everybody wants to think that we're all like all of us in the chat here, where we think, oh, we are ride or die with Bitcoin. We're going to hodl this till we die. We're going to take our Bitcoin to the grave, right? Well, I mean, I think market conditions and seeing the way that people buy and move in markets is always very interesting. And Checkmatey lines it out very perfectly here. When you see 60+% of an asset holding at a certain mark, like 95K, that's just a 5% move. So losses of 20 billions a day, but 3% market cap could see this really fall down. And in 2024 and 25 dips, we saw losses reach 7% or 7 to 8% of the market cap. But nobody wants to see that call after the price is at 95K. That's a critical line. So I'm going to be watching that very closely and following it here closely on that channel. But always make sure you guys are subscribed and hitting that like button for me, as we're going to keep on diving through with all of this. But that 95 in current market conditions has been something that I've been hearing from Checkmatey for a while. So make sure you guys give him a follow if you're not. But that 95K with 50% of USD, that's something that's going to be very, very interesting to track, because Bitcoin hitting that 100K for the first time since May, seeing those liquidations over $1 billion, this is where people are going to start to get shaken out. And I think the connection with AI is something that we are going to start to watch very closely, because October has already been a rougher than usual month, because everybody knows the meme, and I've covered it greatly on this channel, saying it's October. Everybody knows that in October, it's generally just up and to the right. We usually love October. It's usually something that is very positive for the space. We usually see October and November and December as some of the most bullish months in Bitcoin. But for some reason, this time around, October was actually down. And it's interesting because this cycle that we're seeing is actually one of the most unprecedented cycles that we've seen. There's a few things that are already a first. We've seen Bitcoin already being up over the all-time high before the halving. And then we're seeing September positive, with being the first time that after a positive September, we're seeing a negative October. And in a bull market, this is the first time that we're seeing a negative October in a bull run, because normally with those averages, it's very high. And next, we usually see a very, very positive November here, like we see at 42.5% at that average. But October 2025 will go down as one of the most cursed months in crypto, is what they're saying, because 24-hour period, they lost nearly 20 billion in leverage positions. So, what I think this is a sign of is not only that Bitcoin is now financialized, but it's also getting into the overall finance space very closely. And that's where I think it's going to be interesting. We've seen financializations of different markets before. Of course, the stock market is the first one that comes to mind, but real estate has been financialized, whether you like it or not. Where you put your head at night is something that is one of the most financialized markets that we've ever seen. And what happened shortly after real estate got financialized by mortgage backed securities and all of these different products? Well, 2008 happened, one of the biggest crashes ever. Now, Bitcoin is truly decentralized and it's a tougher market to manipulate. But on the flip side of it, we have more money moving into the Bitcoin space than ever before. So, this is something to keep a close eye on because of how closely it can be manipulated with all of this. And we're going to get into much more of this manipulation. But you guys know, as I know, that this is a perfect time to buy the dip, and you want to buy your dip and you don't want to sell. But maybe, just maybe, you want to unlock some of your purchasing power. And you're seeing this dip and you're getting worried. You're saying, oh, should I borrow against my Bitcoin because you see a major dip here? But this is why I've partnered with Salt, because Salt has a no liquidation solution. So if you go to saltlending.com/green dash candle, or the link down in the show notes below, you'll see that they're going to give you guys an exclusive offer. So you never have to sell your Bitcoin. You could just borrow against it. You can do a Salt Shield package as well on there. So you won't have to worry about any liquidation risks. They've got rates starting as low as 8.94%, 12-month duration, and 70% LTV with no prepayment fees at all. So unlock some of your purchasing power today and go to saltlending.com/green-candle and do it today, because we've got some other interesting news to go over about the big short guy who is now betting against the AI bubble. And I've been talking about the potential of this AI bubble for a while, but we've got a lot of people giving different narratives. So, this data center, Bitcoin mining, all of these things are very connected in this space. And we are seeing dips come on down. And, these previous big dips are 21% or more. We've seen 70, 80% crashes in bear markets. Granted, I still think we are in a bull market, and we'll get into all the bullish signals here in a little bit. But, Reno is saying, hey, paper Bitcoin, BlackRock manipulation. People don't understand Bitcoin. Hey, I mean, if it would be this easy, everybody would have invested in Bitcoin a while ago and held on through all of this, right? There's a lot of issues and there's a lot of cycles. And one thing that I've learned of being in Bitcoin for 8 years now is that every single time you think Bitcoin is going to do something and there's a big giant group think around it, it's going to do the opposite. So people screaming for October, there was too many of them. And it looks like that people are wanting to manipulate the potential price and move in and out. And there was a ton of shorts there, right? Shorttober. There was a lot of people there. So it's now what we are thinking, right? So there are there's a potential of this moon pump tonight and all these other things, you know. And I think that at the end of the day, when we see all of these different all of these different avenues coming, we see, people just essentially shorting all other markets, and we're seeing Bitcoin still being very connected to the overall stock market. And I mean, at the end of the day, when you see all of these other cryptos, they move significantly more than Bitcoin's price does. And this is why I always telling you guys, Bitcoin, Bitcoin only. But either way, when we see people shorting giant tech stocks and moving in various ways, this is where it gets interesting, right? Because Bitcoin now is seeing a time where, hey, it's not decoupled. It is still moving very closely with the stock market, and it's still moving closely with all of these tech sectors. And so falling below that 100K for the first time below June, I'm honestly personally shocked that we're seeing Bitcoin at this low. I honestly thought that this would potentially never be the case. But taking a further look into where the amount of wealth is and seeing that every price that we've bought at, it's been essentially just one big red buy or red candle here as of late. And so this is seeing a giant sell off from one of the biggest Bitcoin treasury companies. And then it's also seeing a sell off from the biggest ETF. So in turn, maybe, just maybe, BlackRock is working together with one of these big players such as, the United States or China, because we've heard Eric Trump hinting at Saudi Arabia and some of these other countries buying Bitcoin. But apparently they aren't buying enough to move these markets as significantly as potentially this bad news is. But I like what my friend Rajat Soni who said. He said, I think we're at the point right before optimism, right? October killed so many portfolios because everybody thought it's October, right? We're going to go up and to the right. Everybody thought that this was going to be the case. But one thing that Bitcoin proves to you is that this isn't always what is going to happen, right? So I think that as we start to see, you know, more of these Bitcoiners come in and these new guys come in. October and November have been very interesting, right? Because we saw this dump off, but this market psychology and this Wall Street you know, dump off. This is where I think we're going to start to see this market cycle start to play out. And as you guys know, who have been in Bitcoin for quite some time, this is just par for the course, right? I mean, if you look back at the last bull market, right? We got up to like 60K before we crashed on down to 30K, and then we crawled back up to that 70K mark. So this could very well be another one of these dips here that we start to see where, we got to 101 and then we dipped 20% down to 80. Now we got to 125, 120,000. Now we dipped just below and we can maybe hit that 95K mark, which I think is a very critical mark here. But what I do think is that these are all getting scooped up. And I think that, we're going to start to see more of these Bitcoiners start to come in and buy on these ETFs and buy in recently. And then they're going to see that they aren't as bullish as many people that have been in the market for a while. They aren't used to this much volatility. And to be honest, the more volatility that we start to see in this market, it's going to shake out more people. Now, I'm not a huge proponent of the ETFs, as you guys know. I truly believe in cold storage, and that's where I think Bitcoin is the truest and the best form of savings technology. Look, this is a 5-year chart. If you can hold Bitcoin for 5 years or longer, you're not going to lose any money by any means. And look at this. Even with this dip, Bitcoin is up 2,000, nearly 2,500% in the past 5 years, or 632%, excuse me, percent in the last 5 years. So all you got to do is just keep on holding Bitcoin. And in the past year, it's up 53% from the time that it started at the beginning of the year. Granted, it's down, or it's only up 11% year to date because we had a run towards the end of last year after Donald Trump got elected. But let's be honest here, folks. If you just hold your Bitcoin in self custody, you'll be safe and sound and secure because you know what you're investing in. The safest way to do that is by getting a Trezor Safe 7. It's the first ever quantum ready Bitcoin hardware wallet, and it's what I use to store my Bitcoin. So you can go to Trezor.io or the affiliate link down below. I encourage you guys to go to the affiliate link. Maybe they'll give you a little deal or whatnot. Tell them that Green Candle sent you and go on down to Trezor. Get yourself a Safe 7. They've got a Bitcoin only edition. It's sleek. You can go on pre-order now and you can get it for Christmas. Make sure the holiday season's coming up. So you guys get all these things ready for your friends and family. And then after that, a hardware wallet isn't enough. You need to store your seed phrase in the most secure way possible. The best way to do that is with CryptoSteel. You go to cryptosteel.com/green candle today. And the thing I love about CryptoSteel is that they've got a tamper seal on there. All these other punch plates, if somebody's looking at your seed phrase, they can steal it from you without you even knowing. You'd have to go and check your keys. CryptoSteel, they got a tamper seal on there. And so even if you lose your hardware wallet, you can access your Bitcoin and find a way to do it via your seed phrase as long as it's safe and secure and nobody is stealing that from you. And you got to do that and put your Bitcoin in cold storage because the way that Bitcoin's price moves, folks, it could shake a lot of people out. There could be a big fear and greed index, right? There are the big fear that everybody is scared, right? Everybody's starting to run away from Bitcoin like it's something like we haven't really seen in this, you know, all this noise that we start to see in this various cycle. But if you really take a step back and zoom out, right? When you look at Bitcoin's pullback, it is still up 300% since BlackRock filed for that ETF. So these investors now that are new and getting to the market, they maybe were a little wary, right? They maybe were a little worried of what is going on with these recent dips. But all BlackRock has to do is just point to them and show them, hey, look at this, right? Look at what we see because everybody's been pointing to the worriness of the overall market. But if you look at the fear and greed index, we're starting to get to that fear mark. This is from friend of the program, Marty Bent, who showed all this. But either way, right? We're still up 80% annualized for all of this. So with the gradual increase of, you know, Bitcoin and these ETF products, you know, we're seeing 4 days of straight outflows. We're seeing a treasury company really start to not buy Bitcoin, but we're seeing the bulls continue to load up, right? So we've seen Michael Saylor and Strategy just launch a new product called STAR-E or Stream. And, you know, we see other corporations start to buy Bitcoin. We see Michael Strategy buying nearly 400 Bitcoin and announcing that the other day. So, I mean, if you really take a step back and zoom out, right? There's so many bullish signals that we have. It's incredible because, granted, we had one companies start to sell off, but we're having others really start to come online and really buy Bitcoin. And what I think is interesting and a little different in this cycle is that we're seeing a lot of these Bitcoin mining companies start to hold on to Bitcoin longer than others, right? So these Bitcoin mining companies, right? You have to think, right? You're mining oil, you're mining gold, right? Those guys never hold on to their underlying asset. And before, I used to think that this was a very positive sign to see Bitcoin miners selling off, because you want to remove yourself from the volatility of the underlying asset. But when you've got the big players coming in like Marathon, like Riot, like Clean Spark, loading up on Bitcoin and refusing to sell, trying to hodl as much as possible, I think this is where you start to see some positive signs for Bitcoin, because now this is where, you're going to start to get that supply shortage, right? Because, Senator Cynthia Lummis is out here trying to get everybody to embrace Bitcoin. And if you look on the Bitcoin ETF inflows chart, right, as I showed you guys here the other day, these inflows have actually been negative for the past 4 days. And we start to see some of these bigger spikes down here recently, right? The collection of these. So granted, we saw this one big spike in October where Wednesday the 8th, everybody was buying. But it seems like outside of that day on the 8th, October and November have relatively been in the red, which means the ETFs, the biggest vehicles, they've been selling off. But, when you take a zoom out and you look, okay, these ETFs still have 1.5 million Bitcoin. These publicly traded companies have over 1 million Bitcoin. And there's 208 of these bad boys now really coming online, publicly traded companies. Granted, there's, a bunch of these others, private companies that we don't necessarily know about. These governments have been confiscating more Bitcoin, to say the very least. And, the big players who are extremely bullish on Bitcoin keep buying Bitcoin. So if that's the case, why are you all worried about this? Why are you plebs worried about this? We've got one of the biggest conferences coming up here in Bitcoin Amsterdam, and I'm actually hosting an event here, folks. So I would love for you guys to come out, for those that are in Amsterdam. I posted this on Twitter, on Noster. So if you guys are following Green Candle on either of those, I would love for you guys to come out, come shake my hand, come have a drink with me in Amsterdam. So come on and join the fun if you guys are going to be out there. I'd love to meet you guys all in person and really connect, because I love seeing you guys all in the chat all the time. Either way, I'm going to keep bringing all this to you guys over the internet. You guys are going to, I'm not going anywhere, so don't worry. Even if Bitcoin keeps on crashing, I will be bringing you guys some energy. So go ahead and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. But I hope to see you guys in Amsterdam a week from Thursday. And I will catch you guys all at the next one.